On the cliffs of Newport, Rhode Island, stands a mansion that should not exist anymore. It was built at the height of the Gilded Age, when American wealth reached levels never seen before, and families competed to turn money into permanence. This house was designed to intimidate, to impress, and to secure a family's place among the elite. Its rooms were made for spectacle. Its scale was deliberate. Its cost was staggering. Yet nearly every house built for the same purpose disappeared. Fortunes collapsed. Heirs failed. Taxes rose. Society changed. Across Newport, palaces were abandoned, demolished, or stripped of everything that once made them grand. But this one survived. Not by accident. Not because its owners were richer, and not because it was protected from loss. This documentary examines why a mansion created for extreme wealth outlived the world that built it, how a private palace avoided destruction when so many others did not, and how a single decision transformed a symbol of excess into something that could endure. If you're drawn to the hidden histories behind America's grandest buildings, the power struggles that shaped them, and the quiet moments that decided their fate, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore the Gilded Age, its architecture, and the forces that determined which legacies survived and which were erased. During its earliest years, the mansion hosted the most exclusive gatherings of American society. Guests arrived by carriage, dressed in evening attire, passing through gates that separated the private world within from the rest of Newport. Inside, light poured through tall windows, reflecting off gilded surfaces and polished floors. Music echoed through grand rooms, designed not for comfort, but for spectacle. Today, that same entrance welcomes students and visitors. The spaces once reserved for elite society now serve an entirely different purpose. Offices, classrooms, and gathering areas occupy rooms originally built for dinners, dances, and formal receptions. The transformation of this mansion from private palace to public institution reflects a broader shift in American life, one shaped by economic change, social upheaval, and the gradual collapse of the world that built places like this. The mansion's survival was never guaranteed. Many of Newport's great houses were demolished when their upkeep became impossible. Others fell into disrepair, victims of changing tastes and rising costs. What saved this building was not another fortune, but a decision to let its meaning evolve. Its endurance reveals how wealth, when stripped of its original function, can be repurposed into something lasting. The story of this mansion begins far from Newport. It begins in Manhattan, with land rather than industry, and with a family whose wealth grew quietly while others chased spectacle. Their fortune was built not through railroads or steel, but through patience and ownership. Property accumulated slowly, generation after generation, creating a foundation strong enough to support one of the most ambitious building projects of its time. By the late 19th century, that fortune had reached extraordinary proportions. It generated income without demanding constant attention, freeing its heirs to pursue influence, recognition, and legacy. One of those heirs would decide that wealth alone was not enough. He wanted something visible, something undeniable. He wanted a residence that would announce his family's place among America's elite. Newport provided the perfect setting. Each summer, the nation's richest families gathered along the Rhode Island coast, transforming a quiet seaside town into a stage for competition. Mansions rose one after another, each attempting to surpass the last. Size mattered, but style mattered more. Taste, lineage, and association carried weight in a society obsessed with distinction. To build successfully in Newport required more than money. It required the right architect, one capable of translating ambition into stone. It also required the right partner, someone who understood the social language of power and display. The mansion that would eventually dominate Ochre Point emerged from this combination of fortune, strategy, and vision. Construction would take years. Materials would cross oceans. Craftsmen would be summoned from Europe. Every detail would be scrutinized. Nothing would be left to chance. The result would be a residence unlike any other on the American coast, admired even by those born into ancient privilege. But even as the mansion rose, forces were already gathering that would challenge its future. The world that created such extravagance was fragile, dependent on economic stability and social consensus that would not last. Within a few decades, wars, taxation, and shifting values would turn symbols of triumph into burdens. What followed was not a simple story of decline, but one of adaptation. The building would outlive its original purpose, its owners, and the society that had celebrated it. Its survival would depend on letting go of the very exclusivity it was built to enforce. This is the story of how one of America's grandest Gilded Age mansions moved from private splendor to public life, and how education succeeded where wealth alone could not. The fortune behind the mansion did not emerge overnight. It was the product of restraint rather than excess, of decisions made decades before the Gilded Age reached its peak. While other families tied their wealth to volatile industries, this one relied on land. Property did not disappear. Buildings could burn, businesses could fail, but the ground beneath them endured. The family's earliest ancestors arrived in New York when it was still a colonial outpost. They acquired parcels of land at a time when Manhattan stretched northward into farmland and undeveloped terrain. These early purchases seemed modest at the time, but as the city expanded, their value multiplied. Generation after generation followed the same approach. They leased rather than sold. Income flowed steadily, unaffected by market panics that devastated more speculative fortunes. By the mid-19th century, the family had become one of the largest landholders in Manhattan. Their properties produced rental income that grew each year as the city densified. Unlike families who converted wealth into lavish living, they maintained a low profile. Wealth accumulated quietly, almost invisibly, until it reached a scale that could no longer be ignored. When that fortune passed to the next generation, it did so intact. The heir who would build the Newport mansion inherited not just money, but a system that generated more of it without demanding his constant presence. That freedom allowed him to pursue interests beyond real estate. He entered society fully, not as a newcomer seeking approval, but as a man confident in the permanence of his position. Marriage strengthened that position further. His wife came from a family that understood ambition in a different way. Their wealth was newer, their social standing less secure, but their drive was unmistakable. They believed marriage could elevate a family as effectively as business. Their daughters and sons married strategically, connecting themselves to dynasties whose names carried unquestioned authority. These unions reshaped the social landscape. Titles, fortunes, and influence converged within a single family network. The wife of the Newport mansion's builder understood this world instinctively. She had been raised to observe, evaluate, and advance. Social gatherings were not leisure activities. They were opportunities to consolidate power and reinforce position. When plans for the mansion began, she played an active role. This would not be a retreat from society, but a platform within it. The house would need to accommodate large gatherings, formal dinners, and extended stays by important guests. Every room would contribute to an impression carefully calibrated to communicate refinement, stability, and dominance. To achieve this, they turned to the most accomplished architect in America. His education in Paris had given him an understanding of European aristocratic design unmatched by any of his contemporaries. He did not simply replicate old styles. He adapted them, translating centuries of architectural tradition into forms suitable for American ambition. The design he proposed drew inspiration from French chateaux. Its silhouette would rise dramatically above the cliffs, visible from land and sea alike. Limestone walls would catch the sun, roof lines would break into dormers, and chimneys that suggested age and lineage, even though the building itself was entirely new. Construction demanded unprecedented coordination. Stone arrived by rail and ship. Skilled craftsmen carved each detail by hand. Behind the ornate exterior, modern engineering ensured strength and longevity. Steel framing supported massive decorative elements, combining old-world appearance with new-world technology. The grounds received equal attention. Landscape terraces guided visitors' movement, framing views of the ocean and the mansion itself. Nothing was accidental. Every approach, every turn, every vista reinforced the sense of arrival. Inside, the mansion revealed its full purpose. Electricity illuminated rooms with a brilliance few private residences possessed at the time. Light reflected off gilded surfaces, highlighting woodwork, murals, and imported furnishings. Historic elements acquired from Europe anchored the interiors in a past the family had never lived but wished to evoke. The Great Hall rose 3 stories, asserting dominance through scale alone. Fireplaces sourced from centuries-old estates lent authenticity that no reproduction could achieve. Each room followed a distinct theme, demonstrating mastery of historical styles while maintaining cohesion across the house. The effect on visitors was immediate. Even those accustomed to luxury found themselves momentarily overwhelmed. The mansion succeeded in its objective. It placed its owners among the elite without question. Yet the house did not exist in isolation. Nearby, another family pursued a similar goal. They too employed the same architect. Their vision differed, their resources greater, and their determination relentless. What followed was not merely parallel construction, but competition. 2 houses rose simultaneously along the Newport coast, each designed to command attention. One emphasized elegance and warmth. The other favored monumentality and cold precision. Society watched closely, measuring success not just in cost, but in influence. Summer seasons became stages for rivalry. Guest lists mattered. Invitations carried weight. Each event demanded response from the other household. The mansions themselves became weapons in a social contest that extended beyond architecture. For a time, the competition invigorated Newport. It drew attention, admiration, and envy. But beneath the display, the costs accumulated. Maintaining such houses required armies of staff. Each season demanded preparation, performance, and recovery. The expense was staggering, yet still sustainable, while income remained strong and confidence intact. That balance would not last. Within a few years of the mansion's completion, its creator would die unexpectedly, leaving behind a structure designed for a future he would never see. His death marked the beginning of a transition that would slowly strip the mansion of its original function. The house remained standing, magnificent and intact, but its purpose began to shift. What had been built as a declaration of permanence would soon test the limits of inherited wealth. The world around it was changing, and no amount of stone or ornament could stop that change. The summer seasons continued, even after the loss that reshaped the household. The mansion opened each year as it always had. Rooms were aired, furniture uncovered, gardens restored to precise order. Servants returned to familiar routines. From the outside, little appeared different. But the absence at the center of it all was impossible to ignore. The widow assumed responsibility with composure expected of her position. Society still looked to her for leadership, and she delivered it. Entertainments continued, though subtly altered in tone. The great rooms filled with guests once more, but the spirit of rivalry that had once energized the house gradually softened. The purpose of display gave way to preservation. As years passed, the rhythm of Newport itself began to change. The number of families able and willing to maintain such establishments declined. Younger generations showed less appetite for the rigid social performances their parents had perfected. Domestic service became harder to secure. Costs rose while enthusiasm waned. The children grew into adulthood under these shifting conditions. The daughter's future unfolded abroad, where marriage offered both escape and continuity. Through her, the family's wealth crossed the Atlantic, supporting ancient titles and estates that relied increasingly on American money for survival. Her life followed a path familiar to many women of her class, shaped by diplomacy, expectation, and duty, but softened by genuine affection. The son remained in America, bound to responsibilities he had not chosen but could not refuse. He inherited not only property, but obligation. Manhattan real estate still produced income, but no longer with the ease of earlier decades. Taxes increased, regulations multiplied. The old certainty that land would always sustain the family began to erode. The mansion in Newport posed the greatest challenge. Designed for seasonal grandeur, it functioned poorly in a world moving toward efficiency. Heating such a structure made winter occupancy impractical. Repairs demanded specialized craftsmen no longer readily available. Every year of deferred maintenance multiplied future costs. Across Newport, familiar scenes repeated. Mansions once celebrated appeared shuttered. Some were sold, stripped, and demolished. Others lingered empty, symbols of an era that had outpaced its own survival. Each loss narrowed the possibilities for those that remained. The heir resisted these outcomes as long as possible. Selling the property outright would have solved financial pressures, but at the cost of erasing his father's vision. Allowing decay felt equally unacceptable. The building deserved more than abandonment. For years, he explored alternatives. Institutions were approached, proposals discussed. Each option revealed obstacles. The mansion's size, location, and design discouraged adaptation. Few organizations possessed both the resources and the will to preserve it intact. Time worked against him. Economic instability deepened. Global conflict reshaped priorities. The values that had once elevated private grandeur now favored public utility. Slowly, a different idea emerged. If the mansion could no longer serve wealth, perhaps it could serve purpose. Education offered that possibility. Schools required space, permanence, and setting. They valued continuity rather than display. An institution devoted to learning could inhabit rooms built for society and transform them without erasing their character. When discussions began with a small religious order seeking to expand its educational mission, the match seemed unlikely at first. Yet the more it was considered, the more it aligned with the conditions the heir had set for himself. The building would remain standing. Its architecture would be respected. Its future would extend beyond any single family. The decision required letting go of ownership while preserving meaning. It was not an act of defeat, but of adaptation. In choosing education, the mansion would exchange exclusivity for endurance. The transfer marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The chateau that had once symbolized arrival now symbolized continuity. Its halls, once reserved for the few, would open to many. The transformation would be complete, not through renovation alone, but through redefinition. The transfer of ownership did not diminish the presence of the mansion. If anything, it clarified its future. Where private wealth had failed to guarantee permanence, institutional purpose succeeded. The building entered a new phase of life, one defined not by spectacle, but by daily use. The transition required adaptation rather than erasure. Bedrooms became dormitories, private sitting rooms became classrooms. Spaces designed for social hierarchy were reorganized to support learning and administration. The structure itself imposed constraints, but also offered advantages. High ceilings, natural light, and generous proportions created an environment that felt both imposing and inspiring. Students arrived from backgrounds far removed from the world that had built the mansion. Many were the first in their families to pursue higher education. They crossed thresholds once reserved for society's elite and found opportunity rather than exclusion. The contrast was profound. A house designed to separate now served to include. The institution grew steadily. Additional properties were acquired along the coastline, forming a campus that preserved multiple historic estates. Each acquisition prevented another loss to development or neglect. The mansion at the center became a symbol of this mission, anchoring the institution's identity and history. Over time, the building adapted to modern needs while retaining its character. Offices replaced drawing rooms, meetings replaced receptions. Yet, the defining features remained. The Great Hall continued to dominate the interior. Imported stone, carved wood, and historic fireplaces reminded occupants that these spaces had once served a different purpose. Public access became part of the building's life. Visitors walked through during academic hours, encountering history not behind ropes, but integrated into daily activity. The mansion's survival depended on this openness. It was no longer a monument to wealth, but a functioning part of a living institution. Recognition followed. Preservation programs acknowledged the building's cultural value. Filmmakers and historians rediscovered its interiors, introducing it to audiences who might never travel to Newport. Each appearance reinforced its relevance, not as a relic, but as a participant in contemporary life. The family that built the mansion gradually receded into history. Their fortune dispersed, reshaped by taxes, division, and time. What remained was their most ambitious creation, sustained by a purpose they had never intended, but might have understood. The transformation revealed a broader truth about the Gilded Age. Its buildings were designed to last longer than the values that produced them. Stone outlived certainty. Craftsmanship endured where social order collapsed. Survival belonged not to the wealthiest, but to what could adapt. The mansion still stands above the Atlantic, its profile unchanged against the sky. Waves strike the cliffs below, as they always have. Inside, conversations continue, different in content, but equal in significance to those held a century earlier. The building has moved beyond display into function, beyond exclusivity into service. In that transition lies its legacy, not as a frozen monument to excess, but as an example of how ambition, once redirected, can preserve what might otherwise be lost. The story does not end with preservation. Survival alone does not explain why this mansion continues to matter. Many great houses were saved only to become static museums, frozen representations of a vanished elite. This building followed a different path. It remained active, occupied, and reshaped by the people who passed through it each day. As decades passed, generations of students entered its halls without the weight of inherited privilege that once defined them. They carried notebooks instead of calling cards. Their ambitions were not measured by lineage, but by possibility. The building absorbed these changes quietly. Stone walls designed to impress absorbed lectures, debates, examinations, and private moments of uncertainty that accompany education. Faculty adapted as well. Offices were carved out of rooms never meant for administrative work. Meetings took place beneath ceilings painted by European artists. Decisions shaping academic futures unfolded in spaces originally intended for social maneuvering. The contrast remained striking, yet gradually normalized. The mansion ceased to feel borrowed and became essential. Time continued its work. The 20th century progressed, bringing cultural shifts that further distanced the building from its origins. The rigid social hierarchies that once governed Newport dissolved. The notion of seasonal aristocracy faded into history. What remained was architecture, craftsmanship, and memory. Preservation required vigilance. Weather battered the coastline. Salt air challenged stone and metal. Repairs demanded expertise and funding. Each restoration effort reaffirmed a commitment made decades earlier when the family relinquished ownership. The building survived because people believed it was worth the effort, not because it was easy to maintain. The mansion's presence influenced the institution it housed. It imposed seriousness. It reminded students and staff alike that education belonged to a long continuum of human endeavor. The scale of the rooms discouraged triviality. The weight of history encouraged reflection. Public interest never disappeared entirely. Visitors continued to walk the cliff path, drawn by the silhouette rising above the ocean. Many entered out of curiosity, expecting spectacle. They found something more complex, a place where grandeur coexisted with ordinary routines, where history did not dominate, but cohabited. The mansion's appearances in popular culture reinforced its symbolic power. On screen, it reverted briefly to its earlier role as a stage for wealth and intrigue. Yet when filming ended, the lights dimmed, and the building returned to its daily purpose. Fiction borrowed its image. Reality sustained it. What remains remarkable is not that the mansion survived, but how it survived. It endured not by resisting change, but by accepting it. Each transformation stripped away a layer of exclusivity while preserving structure. Each adaptation extended its relevance. The family that built it could not have predicted this outcome. Their ambitions were personal, social, and immediate. They sought recognition among peers who measured success by spectacle. Yet their most lasting contribution emerged only after their world disappeared. The heir who relinquished the mansion understood this instinctively. His decision acknowledged limits without surrendering meaning. He chose continuity over control. In doing so, he ensured that the building would belong to a future rather than remain captive to the past. Today, the mansion stands as evidence of that choice. It is neither shrine nor ruin. It is used, altered, respected, and alive. Students pass beneath arches meant to impress strangers. Knowledge replaces display. Purpose replaces performance. The Atlantic continues to shape the cliffs below. Storms come and go. Generations arrive and depart. The building remains, not as a symbol of what wealth once was, but as proof of what endurance requires. In the end, the mansion's legacy is not defined by those who built it, but by those who allowed it to change. Where opulence sought immortality and failed, education succeeded. And so the chateau above the sea continues, no longer announcing arrival, but offering passage forward. The continuity of the building's life reveals something essential about American history. The Gilded Age produced structures of extraordinary ambition, yet few were designed with flexibility in mind. They were expressions of confidence, built on the assumption that wealth, hierarchy, and tradition would persist unchanged. When those assumptions collapsed, architecture was forced to adapt or disappear. This mansion adapted because it was allowed to. Its preservation did not depend on nostalgia alone, but on usefulness. Each generation that occupied it redefined its meaning without erasing its past. That balance proved rare among houses of its scale and origin. Students who pass through its halls today encounter history not as spectacle, but as environment. They study beneath ceilings painted for another century's elite. They attend meetings in rooms once devoted to ceremony. The building does not instruct them on its past. It simply exists alongside their present, shaping experience through space rather than narrative. In this way, the mansion accomplishes something its original owners never intended. It democratizes grandeur. What was once restricted becomes shared. What once symbolized separation becomes common ground. The stone remains unchanged, but its message evolves. The surrounding landscape reinforces this continuity. The cliff walk still traces the edge of the Atlantic. Waves still strike the rocks below with the same force they did when the house was new. The view that once framed privilege now frames reflection. Time equalizes what wealth once separated. The broader legacy of the Gilded Age survives unevenly. Many of its most famous residences exist only in photographs or memory. Others persist as museums, preserved but detached from daily life. This mansion occupies a middle ground. It is protected, yet functional. Historic, yet active. That status carries responsibility. Maintenance never ends. Restoration competes with modernization. Each decision weighs preservation against necessity. The building requires constant negotiation between past intention and present need. Yet those negotiations mirror the larger process of history itself. Societies preserve what they can use. What cannot adapt is eventually discarded. This mansion's endurance confirms that relevance matters as much as origin. The family that built it faded from prominence, as nearly all families do. Fortunes divide. Names lose resonance. What survives are decisions made under pressure, choices that favor continuity over pride. The donation that transferred the mansion into public purpose became the family's most lasting act. The building no longer speaks of a rival, dominance, or rivalry. It speaks of transition. It marks the moment when private ambition yielded to collective value. It stands as a physical record of how excess can be reabsorbed into usefulness. On the cliffs of Newport, the mansion remains, not frozen in its first moment of glory, but reshaped by time. Its endurance is quiet, uncelebrated, and, therefore, stronger. The stone does not demand attention, it simply holds. And in holding, it reminds us that what lasts is rarely what was most loudly proclaimed. It is what was allowed to change. The building's continued presence also reshapes how the Gilded Age itself is understood. For decades, that period was remembered primarily for excess, inequality, and spectacle. Mansions like this one were often cited as evidence of indulgence divorced from responsibility. Yet survival complicates that narrative. When a structure outlives the system that created it, it forces reconsideration. The mansion was never modest. Its scale, materials, and craftsmanship were deliberate assertions of power. But stripped of its original social function, those same qualities became assets rather than liabilities. Thick stone walls proved durable. Generous rooms allowed reuse. Architectural integrity invited preservation rather than demolition. This shift highlights a paradox of American wealth. The most extravagant creations of the Gilded Age endured only when removed from private ownership. Individual fortunes proved fragile. Public or institutional stewardship proved resilient. What could not be sustained by family pride alone found stability through shared purpose. As the years passed, the mansion absorbed countless small changes. Wiring was updated. Heating systems replaced obsolete infrastructure. Safety codes required adjustments unimagined by its architect. Each intervention altered the building slightly, yet none erased its identity. Preservation became an ongoing process rather than a single achievement. The people who now occupy the building rarely think about its original owners. Their concerns are immediate and practical. Deadlines, examinations, meetings, and daily routines fill spaces once devoted to ceremony. In this way, the mansion became normalized. Grandeur faded into background. Utility took precedence. That normalization is itself a form of success. A building truly preserved is not one admired from a distance, but one integrated into life. Use protects structure. Activity deters decay. Occupation ensures attention. Empty monuments deteriorate. Living ones endure. Visitors often notice this contrast immediately. They enter expecting formality and encounter motion. Students cross halls mid-conversation. Offices hum with routine. The building does not pause for admiration. It continues. The mansion's survival also altered the surrounding environment. Other historic properties found new uses, inspired in part by this example. Preservation became less about freezing the past and more about extending it forward. Newport's landscape retained more of its architectural history than many similar resorts because adaptation replaced erasure. Time eventually softened even the memory of rivalry. The competitions that once defined summer seasons lost relevance. What remained were buildings, not battles. The mansion's relationship to its former competitors shifted from opposition to coexistence, each structure contributing to a shared historical fabric. The original builder sought permanence through scale. His heir achieved it through restraint. The difference between those approaches explains why the building still stands. Ambition created it. Acceptance preserved it. The mansion now exists outside the cycle that once governed its use. It no longer rises and falls with social fashion. It does not depend on a single family's fortune. Its future rests on collective responsibility rather than individual display. In that sense, the building's final transformation represents the quiet conclusion of the Gilded Age itself. Not an abrupt collapse, but a gradual reorientation. Wealth receded, institutions advanced, private symbols became public spaces. What remains on the cliffs is not a relic of excess, but a record of transition. Stone, shaped by ambition, stabilized by adaptation. The mansion endures not because it resisted change, but because it accepted it, one generation at a time. The endurance of the mansion ultimately reframes the meaning of legacy. For the family that built it, legacy was once measured in visibility, recognition, and social authority. The house was intended to secure remembrance through grandeur. Yet history demonstrated that remembrance follows a different logic. What is remembered longest is not always what was most dominant, but what remained useful. As the decades advanced, fewer people associated the building with its original owners. Names faded, stories blurred. What persisted was the experience of the place itself. The scale of the rooms, the weight of the stone, the relationship between architecture and landscape continued to register, even when the details of origin did not. The building communicated without explanation. This quiet communication is the hallmark of successful preservation. The mansion does not demand to be understood. It allows interpretation. Each generation encounters it differently, shaped by its own values and needs. To some, it represents architectural achievement. To others, opportunity. To many, it is simply part of daily life. The building's adaptation also challenges assumptions about permanence. It proves that durability is not inherent in materials alone. Stone can crack. Wealth can vanish. What endures requires alignment with changing priorities. When purpose aligns with structure, survival becomes possible. In this case, education provided that alignment. Learning requires continuity. Institutions invest in the long term. They value stability. The mansion's physical presence reinforced those values, even as its origins receded into background context. The surrounding city evolved alongside it. Newport transitioned from private resort to shared heritage. Tourism replaced exclusivity. Access replaced invitation. The mansion participated in that shift, opening itself to visitors while remaining embedded in institutional life. What was once seasonal became constant. Where activity had concentrated in a few summer weeks, it now unfolded year-round. The building gained a rhythm independent of social calendars. That regularity protected it from neglect and ensured consistent care. The transformation also altered how history itself was encountered. Rather than preserved behind barriers, the past became something walked through, worked within, and occasionally taken for granted. This integration diminished spectacle but deepened relevance. The mansion's story illustrates a broader pattern repeated across American history. Private ambition creates, public purpose preserves. The transition between the two often determines what survives. Buildings that cannot cross that threshold vanish. Those that do become something larger than their origins. Standing above the Atlantic, the mansion no longer competes. It does not announce superiority. It does not require comparison. It simply exists, shaped by decisions made long after its construction. Its continued presence reflects compromise, foresight, and restraint rather than conquest. In that sense, the building represents a quiet correction to the values that produced it. Excess yielded to utility. Exclusivity gave way to inclusion. What was built to elevate a few now supports many. The Gilded Age sought immortality through display. This mansion achieved it through change, and that difference explains why it still stands. The final measure of the mansion's success lies not in its fame, but in its ordinariness. For those who pass through it daily, the building is no longer extraordinary. It is familiar. That familiarity is not failure. It is the ultimate proof of integration. Students hurry through corridors once meant for processions. Conversations echo beneath ceilings, painted for another century's ambitions. Offices operate where guests once lingered. None of this diminishes the structure. It confirms its relevance. A building that can absorb routine without losing identity has secured its future. The mansion's materials continue to do their work. Stone resists weather. Wood holds warmth. Proportions guide movement and attention. These qualities were not accidental. They were the result of skilled design and uncompromising construction. The original builders demanded permanence. They achieved it, though not in the way they imagined. History often resolves ambition in unexpected ways. What begins as personal assertion becomes communal inheritance. What was built to separate becomes a place of gathering. The mansion's journey reflects this pattern clearly. Each stage of its life answered the needs of its time. The Gilded Age receded, leaving behind structures too large for private life and too significant to discard. Some were lost. Others survived only because someone recognized that preservation required surrender. Ownership had to give way to stewardship. The heir who made that decision did so without certainty of outcome. He could not know how the building would be used decades later, or whether it would remain intact. He acted with restraint rather than pride. That choice mattered more than any architectural feature. Today, the mansion stands as a reminder that endurance depends on flexibility. It carries the marks of multiple eras, layered rather than erased. Its meaning is not fixed. It shifts with each generation that occupies it. From the cliffs above the Atlantic, the building continues to overlook a changing world. Ships no longer arrive bearing society guests. Carriages no longer line the drive. Instead, footsteps come and go with quiet regularity. Learning replaces display. Purpose replaces performance. In the end, the mansion fulfills a role more durable than prestige. It serves. That service, repeated daily, sustains it. Stone and mortar provide the frame, but relevance provides the reason. What remains is not a relic of excess, but a lesson in survival. Wealth created the mansion. Adaptation preserved it. And through that adaptation, the building outlived the ambitions that first gave it form. On the edge of the sea, it stands still, not as a monument to arrival, but as evidence that endurance belongs to what is allowed to change. The mansion's continued life also reshapes how memory functions within architecture. Buildings remember differently than people do. They do not recall names or intentions. They preserve proportions, materials, and decisions made under specific conditions. What survives is not motive, but structure. Within these walls, traces of the original world remain visible to those who look closely. The curvature of staircases reveals how guests were meant to ascend slowly, to be seen. The placement of doors reflects a choreography of movement that once separated servants from hosts. Even the alignment of windows speaks to priorities of display and control. These details persist, quietly documenting a social order that no longer exists. Yet the building does not insist on this history. It allows it to fade into background, offering context rather than command. This restraint distinguishes living preservation from theatrical reconstruction. The mansion does not reenact the past. It accommodates the present. That accommodation requires continuous negotiation. Each generation that occupies the building inherits both opportunity and responsibility. Decisions must balance safety with authenticity, access with protection. Restoration becomes an ethical act rather than a purely technical one. The building's relationship to the surrounding city reflects this same balance. Newport itself has changed from enclave to destination. Where privacy once defined value, visibility now sustains relevance. The mansion participates in this shift by remaining open, not exceptional. It belongs to the city rather than standing apart from it. This belonging ensures vigilance. A building that is seen, used, and valued attracts care. Neglect flourishes in isolation. Integration provides protection. The mansion's survival owes as much to daily footsteps as to historic designation. In this way, the structure transcends its origin story. It no longer exists solely as evidence of wealth or taste. It functions as a framework within which new stories unfold. Each lecture, each conversation, each quiet moment adds another layer of meaning. The original builders sought control over legacy through stone. They believed permanence could be purchased. History demonstrated otherwise. Permanence emerged through relinquishment. Control gave way to continuity. What stands above the Atlantic now is not a frozen artifact, but a negotiated space. It carries ambition without arrogance, grandeur without exclusion, memory without obligation. As time continues, future generations will adapt the building again. Needs will change. Technologies will evolve. The mansion will absorb those changes as it has absorbed others. Its endurance lies not in resisting alteration, but in accommodating it. This capacity for adaptation defines its true significance. The Gilded Age produced many monuments. Few learned how to live beyond their moment. This one did. And so, the mansion remains. Not as a conclusion, but as a process. A structure shaped by ambition, preserved by restraint, and sustained by purpose. On the cliffs of Newport, it continues to hold, not the certainty of wealth, but the resilience of change. The story ultimately settles into stillness. Not an ending, but a steady state. The mansion has passed through spectacle, rivalry, loss, reinvention, and acceptance. What remains is continuity. The Atlantic continues its rhythm below the cliffs. Seasons pass without ceremony. Inside the building, lights turn on in the morning and off at night. Doors open and close. Voices rise and fade. These ordinary acts sustain what extravagance alone could not. The mansion no longer belongs to a single narrative. It carries many at once. Architectural ambition, social transformation, economic reality, institutional purpose. Each layer exists without erasing the others. The building holds them all. This coexistence explains why it still matters. It is not preserved as a symbol of who once held power, but as a space that continues to function. History is present, but it does not dominate. The past informs without dictating. For visitors, the experience is subtle. There is no dramatic reveal, no staged reenactment. The building speaks through scale, through light, through proportion. It asks no reverence. It simply endures. For those who work and study within it, the mansion becomes almost invisible over time. Familiarity dulls spectacle. Yet, even in that familiarity, something remains. The awareness of space, the weight of material, the quiet suggestion that what surrounds them was built with intention. That intention did not guarantee permanence. Decisions did. A choice to relinquish rather than cling, to adapt rather than resist, to allow meaning to change. Many Gilded Age houses were monuments to certainty. This one became a lesson in uncertainty. It survived because it accepted that the world it was built for would not last. What stands above the Atlantic today is not a triumph frozen in stone, but an argument for flexibility. A demonstration that endurance is earned through relevance, not assertion. The mansion remains, not because it was the grandest, but because it found a role after grandeur lost its value. It continues, not as a reminder of excess, but as evidence of what happens when ambition yields to purpose. And so the building holds its place on the cliffs, unchanged in outline, transformed in meaning. The waves continue below. The halls remain in use. The structure endures. The passage of time has softened the edges of the mansion's origins. What was once sharply defined by status and exclusion has blurred into something quieter and more durable. The building no longer announces itself. It does not compete for attention. It simply remains. Its presence now feels inevitable, as though it has always belonged to the landscape and to the lives unfolding within it. That sense of inevitability is deceptive. Survival required a series of deliberate choices, each made under pressure, each carrying consequences that could not be fully known at the time. The decision to preserve the mansion through education altered its relationship with permanence. Private houses depend on individual will. Institutions depend on continuity. By entering the orbit of an institution, the building gained insulation from the volatility that had undone so many others of its kind. Generations pass through without inheriting ownership, yet they inherit experience. They learn in rooms shaped by another era's ambitions. They adapt those rooms to new needs without fully erasing their past. In doing so, they participate in preservation without consciously intending to. The building's endurance challenges the assumption that relevance must be loud. It has outlasted rivals whose names once commanded greater attention. It has survived because it accepted modesty after excess, usefulness after display. From the outside, the mansion still carries the visual language of power. From within, it operates as infrastructure. That duality defines its modern identity. It is both artifact and instrument, history and present tense. This balance ensures that the building remains legible. It does not require explanation to justify its existence. It demonstrates its value through continued function. In a landscape shaped by loss and replacement, that demonstration matters. The cliffs beneath it erode slowly, reshaped by water and wind. The building above responds in its own way, absorbing change through maintenance, repair, and adaptation. Both processes are gradual. Both are necessary. In the end, the mansion stands as evidence that endurance is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, incremental, and sustained by care. What survives is not what demands permanence, but what earns it. Above the Atlantic, the structure remains, neither relic nor spectacle. It has moved beyond the era that produced it and found stability in a world that followed. That is its final distinction. The building's endurance also reframes how ambition is judged. In its original context, success was measured by visibility. The larger the house, the more unmistakable the message. Architecture served as announcement, a way of fixing one family's name into the social landscape. That logic no longer governs what survives. What remains valued now is continuity. The mansion's greatest strength is not what it proclaims, but what it accommodates. Its rooms have proven capable of absorbing new functions without surrendering their integrity. That capacity distinguishes it from structures designed solely for display. The mansion's transformation reveals how excess can be redirected rather than erased. The scale that once separated hosts from guests now supports community. The ornament that once communicated privilege now frames everyday activity. Meaning shifted without collapse. This shift also alters the way the Gilded Age itself is encountered. Rather than appearing as a closed chapter defined only by inequality and extravagance, it becomes part of an ongoing story. The building does not deny its origins, it contextualizes them. It allows history to exist alongside present use without demanding judgment. For those who encounter the mansion casually, this coexistence may go unnoticed. For those who look closely, it offers a quiet lesson. Structures outlive intentions. What determines their fate is not how forcefully they are built, but how flexibly they are allowed to live. The mansion's survival was not inevitable. It was the result of relinquishment at a critical moment. When ownership yielded to stewardship, permanence became possible. That distinction explains why the building stands, while so many others do not. The Atlantic remains indifferent to this history. Waves continue to meet the cliffs as they always have. The building does not resist that indifference. It endures within it. What stands today is not a monument to arrival, but a record of passage. Through wealth, loss, adaptation, and renewal, the mansion has moved beyond its original purpose. It exists now not to impress, but to function. In that function lies its quiet authority. It no longer competes with its past. It carries it forward, reshaped but intact. And so, on the edge of the sea, the mansion continues, defined not by what it once was, but by what it was willing to become. What ultimately defines the mansion's place in history is not its beginning or even its transformation, but its persistence. Few structures of its scale were allowed to continue evolving beyond the moment that justified their construction. Most were tied too tightly to the fortunes and identities of their creators. When those fortunes fractured, the buildings followed. This one did not. It detached itself from ownership and attached itself to use. That shift altered everything. No longer dependent on a single family's resources or relevance, it became part of a collective framework that could absorb change without collapse. The architecture made this possible. The building was designed with generosity of space and strength of material. Rooms could be reassigned without losing coherence. Circulation paths adapted to new patterns of movement. Light and proportion remained effective regardless of purpose. What had been intended for display proved unexpectedly practical. As the decades advanced, the mansion continued to accumulate meaning without ceremony. It did not require restoration as spectacle. Its care was incremental, often unnoticed. Repairs were made because they were necessary, not because they were symbolic. This practicality reinforced longevity. The building's relationship to memory also evolved. It ceased to operate as a container of personal legacy and became a vessel of shared experience. Thousands of individuals passed through its spaces, each leaving with impressions shaped more by their own lives than by the mansion's origins. In this way, history dispersed rather than concentrated. This dispersion protected the structure from stagnation. Buildings preserved solely as memorials risk becoming static. This one avoided that fate by remaining occupied. Its relevance renewed itself continuously, not through reverence, but through routine. The surrounding city reflected this same dynamic. Newport's identity shifted from exclusivity to accessibility. What had once been guarded became visible. The mansion participated in that shift by remaining open, unremarkable in its availability, extraordinary only in its endurance. Time continued to erode distinctions that once seemed permanent. Social hierarchies dissolved, economic systems restructured, yet the building persisted, largely unchanged in form, steadily transformed in meaning. In that persistence lies its final significance. It demonstrates that survival is not granted by ambition alone. It is earned through adaptability, restraint, and the willingness to surrender control. The mansion on the cliffs does not commemorate dominance. It illustrates transition. It stands as evidence that what lasts is not always what was most desired, but what was most willing to change. Above the Atlantic, it remains, not asserting, not retreating, simply holding its place, shaped by time, sustained by use, and defined by endurance. The building's continued life offers a quiet conclusion to a story that began with certainty. When it was first conceived, nothing about it suggested compromise. Its scale, materials, and location all implied permanence rooted in wealth and authority. It was meant to fix a family's place in history through architecture alone. History answered differently. It demonstrated that permanence is negotiated, not declared. The mansion's endurance came not from resisting change, but from yielding to it at precisely the right moment. That surrender transformed what might have become a burden into an asset. What stands today is not a contradiction of its origins, but an extension of them. The same craftsmanship that once served exclusivity now supports longevity. The same attention to detail that once impressed guests now sustains daily use. Nothing essential was lost. Meaning was reassigned. This reassignment reflects a broader truth about American spaces of power. Many were built to concentrate influence. Fewer learned how to distribute it. The mansion succeeded where others failed because it accepted redistribution without collapse. Inside, the building continues to shape behavior subtly. Its proportions encourage pause. Its materials absorb sound and movement differently than modern construction. Even without awareness of history, occupants respond to space. Architecture influences conduct long after intent fades. The mansion's presence also resists erasure. In a landscape where replacement often follows obsolescence, its survival asserts that continuity has value. It proves that adaptation can preserve character rather than dilute it. As years advance, new generations encounter the building without expectation. They do not arrive seeking symbols of wealth or rivalry. They encounter a functional space that happens to carry history. That incidental encounter may be the most sustainable form of remembrance. The building's endurance reframes loss as transformation. What the family relinquished was ownership, not significance. What society gained was access, not spectacle. The exchange preserved structure while redefining meaning. On the cliffs above the Atlantic, the mansion remains anchored, neither isolated nor dominant. It has learned how to exist within change rather than above it. That lesson, embodied in stone, explains why it still stands. The Gilded Age sought immortality through assertion. This building achieved it through accommodation. And in that difference lies its lasting relevance. The passage from private monument to shared space completes a cycle that defines many of America's grandest structures. What begins as personal ambition often survives only when it becomes collective responsibility. The mansion's journey illustrates this pattern with unusual clarity. At its height, the house functioned as an extension of its owner's identity. Its rooms mirrored social hierarchies. Its scale enforced distance. Its beauty signaled power. All of that depended on a fragile ecosystem of wealth, labor, and belief that such a world should exist unchanged. When that ecosystem collapsed, the building was forced to confront a choice shared by many of its contemporaries: remain tied to a vanished order or detach and adapt. The latter required humility. It required accepting that the house could no longer mean what it once did. That acceptance proved decisive. By allowing the mansion to serve a purpose unrelated to prestige, its stewards ensured relevance. Relevance invited care, Care produced longevity. The sequence mattered. What makes this transformation distinctive is its completeness. The building was not partially repurposed or reluctantly maintained. It was fully absorbed into a new mission. Education did not borrow the mansion temporarily. It claimed it. In doing so, it anchored learning within a physical reminder of how quickly certainty can dissolve. For students and faculty, the mansion does not present itself as a moral lesson. It offers context rather than instruction. Its walls do not condemn excess or celebrate restraint. They simply bear witness to change. That neutrality allows the building to persist without argument. It does not demand interpretation. It does not insist on admiration. It functions, and in functioning, it endures. The Atlantic remains constant in its presence. Wind, salt, and water test the structure continuously. Each challenge met reinforces the same principle that governs the mansion's history. Survival is incremental. It depends on attention rather than declaration. In this way, the building becomes a counterpoint to the era that produced it. Where the Gilded Age valued scale over sustainability, the mansion's later life values stewardship. Where excess once signaled success, restraint now ensures continuation. Nothing about this outcome was inevitable. It emerged from a decision made at a moment when destruction seemed the simplest solution. That decision altered the building's trajectory permanently. The mansion still carries the visual language of power, but power no longer defines its role. Utility does. That shift has proven more durable than any original ambition. Above the cliffs, the structure remains a fixed presence in a changing world, not because it was untouched by history, but because it moved with it. And that movement, slow and deliberate, secured its place long after the world that created it passed away. What follows is not a conclusion in the traditional sense, but a settling. The building has reached a state where its future no longer depends on dramatic intervention. Its survival is sustained through ordinary continuity. That, more than spectacle or preservation campaigns, is what secures its place. The mansion's presence has become woven into daily patterns. Schedules, semesters, and routines now dictate its rhythm. Bells replace orchestras. Announcements replace invitations. The house responds to these changes without resistance. It was built to endure, even if it was not built for this. This endurance reshapes how permanence is understood. Permanence is not static. It is maintained through repetition, through use, through relevance renewed each day. The mansion remains because it continues to matter in practical ways. Its architecture still influences experience. Scale encourages awareness. Materials create atmosphere. Light behaves differently in rooms designed before efficiency replaced elegance. These qualities persist, shaping interactions without demanding recognition. The original builders sought to control how the house would be seen. That control proved temporary. What endured was what they could not fully dictate, how the building could be inhabited by others long after them. In relinquishing control, the structure gained freedom. It moved beyond family narrative into collective memory. It no longer represents one lineage. It represents a process of change. The building's story now belongs to those who occupy it, those who pass through it briefly, and those who encounter it unexpectedly. Each experience adds weight without burden. From the cliffwalk, the mansion still appears much as it always has: stone against sky, order against nature. But its meaning has shifted inward. It is no longer defined by what it announces, but by what it supports. This transformation offers a quiet resolution to the ambitions that shaped it. What was once built to assert dominance now sustains possibility. That exchange preserved what assertion alone could not. The mansion remains, not as a symbol frozen in time, but as a structure that accepted time as its collaborator. That acceptance, more than any original intent, explains why it still stands.